Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to each and every one of you for joining us. And of course, this is quite an interactive session. Ultimately, each of you in the room here are experts in your field. So don't mind me as if I do pass around questions or ask you to engage at any time during the conversation. You are more than welcome to raise your hand. A microphone will make its way to you. I'm happy to share mine. And you can also address some of the questions that you might have with our panelists who are joining us here today. You might be familiar with them. Their names and titles are on screen. And of course, they have amazing experience in the fields within which they operate. And we're tackling quite a critical conversation because since I can recall, since my participation within the API Summit, the cost of construction is always a critical conversation to have because there are many parts to it which influence the dynamics, and of course, as a developer and investor can actually sometimes decide to change your mind regarding some of these outcomes that do take place. But I'd like to start very closely with Christian closest to my left, getting an overview and understanding from each of you as panelists with regard to what the status quo is, what you've observed in the environment so far, before we start peeling away at some of the critical issues that are underlying. Let's start with you.
Okay, so you want an overview of what we can discuss now, the status quo of Africa?
Sure.
Okay, well, look, we are, doing cost consulting over the whole continent, sub-Saharan Africa more, and, just to start off, Africa is a moving target. I think my panelists will agree with me. It's very difficult to say, West Africa, East Africa, Central East Africa, because, you've got different economies in each country, actually. If you take Nigeria, Lagos, Abuja, it's different. If you take Accra, you've got, Ghana, you've got Accra, Kumasi, which is different. We're going to touch on that now based on, logistics. East Africa, let's say Mozambique, you get the South, Central, and North, which all differ as well. So it's a very broad topic to speak about. And like I said, it's a moving target. And there's so many factors that we're going to touch on now, and that takes South Africa into account as well. Infrastructure, government, rail, service, powers, etc. It all affects the cost, as well as the local skills and local suppliers, which we're trying to up in certain countries. But the problem is our clients don't always want to use more cheaper products, so it makes it very difficult. I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear.
Comfortable with that, Mark? Just add your themes to the pot before we start distilling them further.
I agree with Christian. Africa is a kind of, countries have peaks and troughs. Have good years and lean years, and particularly trying to do property development, it's very difficult over a 4-year period, whether it's in boom time or in sort of recession. It's very hard at times to predict what those costs may be in 4 or 5 years' time. And again, there's a lot of macroeconomic influences to construction cost, which we will touch on, I'm sure, later, but that does have a real big impact on what the currency's doing, what inflation's doing, which impacts on labour costs and things like that. And it is a moving sort of feast, and it's at times hard to predict long term into the future.
Exactly. All those themes which are often outside of our control a lot of the time. Tazim, let's get your insight and themes as well thrown around before we start peeling away at them further.
Thank you. So I do agree with my colleagues. I want to start as well with a quote from the latest issue of The Economist. It says, "Construction holds the dubious honor of having the lowest productivity gains of any industry, according to McKinsey and consultants." So we're having a lot of issues in terms of we're the project delivery side of things, and we face a lot of challenges. And a couple of them that they kind of came up with is we're using a lot more people than equipment, and there's too many of the builders out there. So the markets is not consolidating. So I think we're seeing some of the same things in Africa. In my part of Africa, it's Francophone West Africa. Those challenges are very acute. From a skill set point of view as well, we have some issues. So quality is impacted, budget is impacted, the time schedule are impacted very often. So the objective is to try to improve all those things. And I think as builders, we have our work cut out for that. But there's a few things that we can do about it, and we're starting to play a bit with. But overall, I'd say this is where we're at, but there's a lot of room for improvement. We're trying to move in the right direction.
To the other Mark, on the panel. Your thoughts?
I think generally at the moment in the property sector, we're finding that in your bigger centres, your more mature markets like the South Africas, the Kenyas, the Ethiopias, and then probably on the west coast you've got Nigeria and Ghana, and probably moving towards Ivory Coast and Cameroon now. You get more of a pattern developing where a little bit more certainty in where the market is going and what you expect next. I think the big challenge for us at the moment is where all the big commodities are at the moment and where there are new opportunities that are coming in where you don't have an established market. And I think there's where a huge opportunity, but obviously where the biggest risk is on the African continent at the moment. And I think that's where it's going to take a lot more thought in how we procure, how we contract, and as Mark was saying now, the look ahead, we've got to look ahead, sort of 4, 5, 10 years, and to understand that money is going to be tied up for some time, and how you're going to manage that. So I think for me, the exciting bit is those countries that probably aren't as developed, where there's going to be a lot more opportunity.
I'm going to stay with you for a moment and actually peel away some of the countries that you alluded to, where we are seeing dynamics of those who are managing to see a decrease in costs, for those who might have exposure to some of the commodity exporting nations that you alluded to. How are we managing the dynamics compared to what happened 4 years ago? How are you procuring differently to ensure that you bring a great value and product, but at the best price?
Well, your procurement issues, I think one size doesn't fit all in Africa. So your procurement issues, I mean, whether you're a landlocked country or whether you're a coastal country, generally most of the products that you will put into your buildings don't come from the country that you'll be building in. Not obviously your bricks and mortar, that can be obtained locally, but certainly all your finishes and everything else have to be imported. So ultimately, those add a lot of cost to your overall construction and to the overall projects that you have to plan. Then what we're also finding is around your logistics and your infrastructure to get the products to market, get the products to where they're required, is adding a lot of cost to the market. And then finally, where you've got new commodities that are like the oil and gas, like the mining, which has obviously been down at the moment. But if you look at oil and gas, it's driving East Africa quite a lot at the moment, whether it be Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. And there you're going to suddenly have all your contractors will be tied up with potentially with big oil and gas opportunities, and that will also then start driving your prices up, and obviously there'll be a shortage of skills. And then finally, which I'm sure we'll get to, but I'm not going to go into the detail of it now, is your localization and what effect that has on your projects.
I also want to, I was talking about numbers in the previous panel, I want to get figures out with regard to, the additional margins and pressure that we are seeing. I'm not too sure if you are able to give some examples of where the pressure has been on in the last 4 years, where we see a considerable increase in cost. And Christian, I see you reaching for the mic. Perhaps you have experiences and tangible results that we can actually talk to as a practical example to learn from here.
Increases are, to be honest, over the past, let's say 3-4 years, I haven't seen that, but in the countries working. Mozambique, I can give you accurate figures. Concrete in Maputo, we're talking about concrete because imports, it's all imported everything on dollar-based value. That doesn't have a big difference. It will, but the Southern Africa comes from SA, West Africa from Europe, all over. But Mozambique, for instance, in Maputo, concrete, let's take 3 MPa concrete. About 3 years ago, you would pay, in excess of $200 a cube. And now we're building centers for less than $100 a cube. Same with Ghana. I've got my colleagues here who will answer you. 2050, Accra, for instance, concrete almost halved in price. Same with bricks, mortar, everything. So even Nigeria now, I'm not active there, but after the crash, your local currency dropped from 170 to about 400 versus the dollar, which, so your labor rates goes down. And materials, according to dollar, it went up slightly, but all in all, because of the low, contractors, they're hungry for work, so they drop their profit margins, they drop the P&Gs. So costs are actually going down there as well. And Kenya was actually, I think, Mark, you can help me, Kenya was actually very stable over the past couple of years, and because it's very similar to SA, you've got a very sophisticated market of contractors, professionals, skills. And that's my, I don't know, what do you guys want to add?
Feel free. Even anyone else in the room who might want to add, if there are themes or experiences that you've had, please feel free to jump into the conversation. We're happy to share the microphone with you. By show of hands, anyone so far? There's a hand at the back there. I'll come. Let me start with you, sir, and then we'll make the way to the back there.
I think just to support Christian there, it's because of dollar-based, the construction costs have remained quite stable, but not in local currencies. It's because of the local currency decline that local products become cheaper and imports stay stable. And the net effect is that you've actually got lower dollar prices, but not necessarily in the local currency. So it's all, because of the dollar, it stays quite stable and inflation is less. And that's been our experience in the African countries, where we had, like the medical decline from 30 to 1 in 2013 up to 75 meds to $1. So that meant that concrete local supplies are half in price.
So does it mean from a procurement perspective, you're sticking to the strategy of hedging, of course, purchasing a particular currency, even though that might be difficult to follow the short and medium term?
It's a difficult question. You know, it's if the budget, you know, if the project's dollar based, you know, then it helps. But the problem with Africa is, and it's actually not the topic now, it's difficult to sign dollar leases in some of these countries because of fluctuations. You know, if you know, Mozambique, for instance, the tenants, retail, commercial as well, they won't often sign dollar leases because of the fluctuations. So to get funding on a dollar project with med leases, it makes it difficult, but the cost stays the same in dollar value. But that's on a whole other level. Yeah, it's a difficult one.
I would assume from a procurement perspective,
Yes. Okay. But remember, still dollar terms. But you know, then you've got contracts set in dollars, and funding will be in dollars because of dollar. But you don't make the deals work. From a construction point of view, easy, and to against the dollar is easy, and the costs are lower. But it's not as easy to make the project work.
Hi, my name is Luke from Kenya, and we have had projects in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia. And right now we are seeing that, especially in Kenya, our central bank is playing defense against our currency, so its value is off by 20%. And we're kind of expecting some escalation in costs in the next couple of years. Secondly, is that with the jobs that we're doing in the countries that use our port, we get the same material, but there's the cost of crossing borders. Our borders have ethical challenges, so there's also an escalation in that regard, especially if you're procuring, as he said, a lot of the finishes are not from the country that you're installing them in, so you have to bring them in. But also, we have been fortunate that the costs have been rather stable because of a lot of government influence. And now we are getting into an area where concrete is going to go down because Dangote started bringing cement and it's like half the cost. And the cement cartel is up in arms and they want to introduce tariffs and everything. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on the matter. That's a difficult question because we normally class our contractors into 3 kinds. There are the local ones, like the local Kenyans, then there are Indians, and the Chinese. And the dynamics between the 3 of them, depending on the project, depending on the size of the project, depending on who introduced who, really has a big influence on the kind of cost that you're going to have. And especially if they're getting their products from elsewhere, sometimes we have projects that require only products from commercial areas or from, okay, there was something previous to when the George Bush administration was there, that we couldn't get things from Egypt and it was cheaper, or Turkey, because they're not part of the EU and it's a EU funded project. So I'd rather say it's project by project. If we have an Indian client who's doing a hospital, and he's getting all his stuff from India. And it really brings down the costs because he has cousins on the other side and they can bring it in very easily. But then to try and translate that to public hospital project, it's not the same, because then you also have ethical barriers, what you call facilitation fees. So you'd have to do it project by project and advise the client accordingly, especially in procurement methods and the method of contracting.
Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate the feedback. I want us to obviously explore this further within our panel, and of course the other individuals in the room also giving us their feedback and perspective. And you mentioned the issues of skills was also highlighted earlier on, processes and purchasing the appropriate contents and quality of a product that we're looking for. Let's unpack skills slightly for a little bit longer. As has been mentioned, there is a significant shortage of relevant skills and talent available on the continent. What are we doing? What are we seeing in order to see the necessary changes and progress taking place in this particular market? Mark, number one, I'll start with you, and then open again to the panel and members in the room.
We are seeing a greater skill base being created, but I would say not as quickly as the market demands or needs. Unfortunately, a lot of Africa still works on a traditional single contractor basis, where that single contractor employs all of the labour. So from the guys doing the concrete and the formwork, to the painters, to the electricians. And for me, I think if we could see a development of subcontractors where you get innovation and people, sort of specialising in their fields, that
would you say the market is encouraging that and enabling that at the moment?
It is. What we're seeing is where we have a shortage, we are importing labour and trades, even for things like tiling, particularly mechanical, electrical, facades, we're bringing all that extra labour in, which all adds cost to that. But if you could develop a sort of a local supply chain and encourage that use of subcontractors, I think that would really bring innovation to the local workforce and the skilled labour, and also help make that a more sustainable business. I mean, I travel in Africa quite a lot. I've been to Africa, and I'd say half the planes are full of contractors and consultants travelling up into Africa to deliver projects. And I think if the market could develop beyond that single contractor basis, it would bring real innovation and efficiency to the market.
Tazim, from your experience, and Mark, feel free to add.
Yeah, so my perspective is coming from a builder in this particular market, but I think there's two sides of the issue. There's the training education side, there's experience. For the training education, we form a lot of engineers in my country, but the biggest portion of your workers are at the very technical, low-end type of level. Those people, we hire them actually on a daily basis, and they come from almost everywhere. You don't have any way of checking their background. They just tell you we can do this. And then since there's a lot of work going on, they have a choice of saying, if you don't hire me, I'll just go work somewhere else. So we need to make sure that these guys, we have an opportunity to train them. And for us, we started thinking about, would we open a training facility to give opportunity to the youth to come? Because 15% of the work force in my country work in construction, and most of them are not trained. So how do you have projects that allow them to get some theoretical training and then some on-practice, on-the-field training? Building on that last one, we need more experience for our workers, and that's at all levels. Usually what you kind of see is for the bigger kind of projects, we have international contractors that come in, and they come in with their workers. So we don't get the exposure of having subcontracting opportunities for our workforce to be exposed to bigger type of projects. So our governments have to be able to encourage these two sides of this equation to be able to solve it long term. But we definitely need better skills at the delivery.
I very much agree with you there, Taz. I think the big issue in Africa, if you think you're going to go and build a building in Africa without using local people or embracing the localization in the country, you're missing a big trick. Most countries that you go to, if you do travel extensively in Africa, there actually are very good skills available in your more basic structures. So, if you're doing an oil and gas rig or something like that, you're not going to find those guys around. But if you're building a particularly intricate high-rise building, you might not have the contractors that have done that before. But anything in between that, you'd be surprised at how good the contractors are there. It does take a bit of knowledge of the local market, and it takes a little bit of planning up front. If you don't plan your project, if you think you're going to plan your project in South Africa or in Europe, and then just take it into Africa and deliver it, that is where it's going to cost you a lot of money. If you're bringing in all your international builders and all your international, that's also going to add to your costs. Now, I'm not saying that you can do every single building in Africa with local contractors, but I do think that there is a lot more talent available out there than potentially we give credence to. The other thing is that a lot of the international developers in Africa think that they would like to build something risk-free in Africa. So by doing that, they want to pass all the risk onto the contractor, and ultimately those contractors don't have that ability to take all that risk. And I've never seen a contractor that's going to lose his business to make sure that your business is a success. So at the end of the day, the way they approach it is very different, and they will walk away from a project if you push them into a corner where they can't deliver. But that's a lot around just the knowledge and understanding of the way of contracting. So I'm certainly an advocate of the skills that are out there, but obviously you've got to pick your area and you've got to pick your type of construction you're looking at. But I do think there's a lot more out there than we probably give credit for.
Just to build on that, we find that there's also a significant lack of a standard that's been set. Especially in South Africa, we know that quantity survey is well respected, but across the continent, is that the case where the standard is set and there's I'm struggling to find another word other than standard, but I guess you understand what I'm trying to say, to ensure that the quality of work and level of professionalism is maintained in the various markets. Christian, and I look at you because I know your background, right?
Look, we've said in the past that these panels, okay, so I'm going to start with the risk. If you've got a proper team on board, professional team, that has experience, there's very little risk that you don't know about. So you plan according to, if you've got a good PM on board, like Mr. Bed sitting there, you should look past all of these things, and we should use the local labour, because that's just make the projects feasible. Because the local labour are very cheap, and it helps. It adds on to what we said about the local currencies. So if you've got a good team on board leading the contractor and a few team leaders, site managers from SA or wherever. It can work. The thing is, if you work with local developers or African developers, they infer it and they're open to use local labour, local skills, and they'll go with the cheapest contractors. But our international developers, they go there. Every time it's a risk, and they're very risk averse, as we all know, and they'll never, it's very difficult to sell a local contract with a low price for local labour to them. They want their international expertise, which makes it more expensive. Expat salaries add to your P&Gs. But then again, they teach local guys. I don't know. Ask me another question.
I think the Pentad team that's sitting here is disrupting proceedings slightly.
It's actually an interesting question because depending on what segments of the market you look at, for very big projects, as I said, probably have international contractors that come, and there's very few players that can bid for those kind of works. If you go anything below that, there's so many players, you start competing on price, which is a paradoxical thing if you talk about quality, because quality costs money. So how can you compete on price when you're trying to get to quality? And there's two sides of it. If you're a builder who differentiates themselves in quality, you have to be okay with leaving part of the market out, because people are not just going to want to work with you, they don't want to pay for the money. And if you're saying this is our value proposition, we're going to be a bit higher than the market, but we can give you international standards in terms of quality, then there's a bit of a niche market to go in. So you have this overall thing where you have to contract as much as get as much small as possible your price for construction, and yet you want quality. So how do you find people who can do both of those things? And coming back real quick on the skill set, there's one thing we tend to forget. there's the technical part of it, but there's the running, the contracting business part of it as well. Is a lot of our challenges are around, funny enough, financing for our operations in contracting. Because as you say, most of the work that's not structural, you go and get your materials from overseas. If you don't have the proper financing, if you don't have the proper supply chain management and all these things around those functions, you might have issues. So just wanted to know that.
I just want to gauge from everyone else in the room any feedback that you'd like to provide on skills, as well as some of the other themes that we've uncovered so far, if there are particular lessons that you might have learned or some outcomes that you'd like to share.
Thanks, it's Mike Taylor, Betts Townsend. I think I'll sit there as well. I would say, talking about Kenya and talking about my colleague there, 6 years ago, when I sort of arrived, the level of contracting was, I would have deemed substandard, with the likes of Luxman Bai, Parabatsiani, some of the bigger contractors, and those who have grown substantially. We introduced, and it's not a new system, but it was the coffer system. I think a lot of people might be aware of a coffer or a waffle structure. Since we delivered the first project in coffer, I think there must be at least 50 buildings being built with coffer. And they're no longer using FormSCAF or using the teams we initially migrated from here and from India. And the same is started with what they call post-tension structures. So we've introduced post-tension structure on a big shopping mall now under construction called Sarat. And even within the period that we brought Fresnay and some of the guys in, the local contractors have already started their own post-tension contracting divisions. So I found that the skill set, and this is extended into Rwanda and Tanzania as well, is that they're very quick on the uptake. Their ability to grasp something, mimic something, and perform and then undercut. And that's what I was looking at some of these stats in some of the build-out costs, and there's quite a few circulations. In fact, TNT has got an insert in this bag. And you know, if you look at Kenya, I think you guys have rated the build-out cost in Kenya as the third lowest out of a spectrum of 40 or 50 countries. And that's where they're really good. They are very, very good at finessing. And then I think the other thing just now from just a question prior to this was now I've gone blank. It's not often. No, it's just on the costing. So the skill, and then also on the costing, on the subcontractors, nurturing contractors and subcontractors. One thing, and I'm sure you again can detest or contest this, is that the main contractors in these areas, and they're rapidly developing, those subcontractors who were very close to those main contractors, and we've seen this in Kenya, when you prepare the subcontractors list for tender and offer it up to the main contractor, they will very, very quickly cross out, no, 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 yes, yes, yes. And then drill down on the bill of quantities, and you can start seeing that the principal contractors are pricing in with the subcontractors. So I think as that market nurtures, and ourselves as Betts Townsend are starting to do a lot more construction management and turnkey in that market, that market is definitely moving on the subcontracting. The subcontractors are becoming more specialized, and I think that's going to be a lot healthier for the industry as it moves forward, so as opposed to just always being confined to 2 or 3 of the big principal contractors.
Thank you so much. Fantastic feedback. Anyone else in the room with some? Is this tag teaming here?
Okay, I agree with most of the things that you've said. And I also wanted to add that in Kenya, we have, with the new constitutional dispensation, National Construction Authority. And right now they're going around sites making sure that even the artisans have some form of training, which helps in what you call skills and passing on technical capacity. It doesn't necessarily mean that they got a formal education, it's just formalizing what they already know. A lot of it is apprenticeship. You start from sweeping the site to doing a bit of plaster, and by a process of correction and caning and encouragement, they actually get the skills that are necessary for that. And then what he also said is that about Kenyans being quick on the uptick. when the Chinese came, we noticed that there was great downward pressure on the costs. But very soon, the Indians and the local contractors caught on. And you do a tender these days, and the Indians and the Kenyans and the Chinese are more or less the same, which I guess is a good thing and keeps the costs down considerably, and it's easier to predict. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else in the room with some feedback? Before we move on to two more themes that I'd like to explore, and I want to rattle the page slightly because we often talk about themes like the fourth industrial revolution and technology and 3D printing. And because I'm in the media and we hear about these concepts and themes, I would assume that's exactly what we need on the African continent to really help when it comes to cutting down costs and procurement, when it comes to the developments that we look at. I'm sure we're quite a distance away from 3D printing bricks, but I'm sure there are other products that might be available. And is that a concept or theme that is relevant to the industry, or are we perhaps looking too far ahead at something that might not really impact the African investment narrative just yet? Any key takers for that question? Anywhere in the room? At the back there. Christian, you want to respond as I move to the back quickly just to get your response there?
No, I'll respond when he's done.
Now, in response to your comment, there has been buildings printed in China, as far as I know, 3 stories. So it exists. I don't know how beneficial it will be for the African market. We don't want to take labor jobs away, but it's been done.
Anyone else with feedback there? Is it relevant? Should we be discussing it? Does it matter, especially in this current climate? Tess?
I think we should, because there's so much to be done. I think we want to be as efficient as we can from a delivery point of view. So if investments in technologies allow us to do that, let's do it. I think we're not there in being able to go and procure those technologies. I feel like there's been innovation in terms of, let's think about the structure of what we're trying to build and what exists out there that we can leverage. You've seen a lot of buildings now or hotels being developed with containers. It's becoming more and more popular. So it's not highly technical, but it's a pragmatic, practical way of approaching things, and it works. And you've seen a lot of more, how do you industrialize construction, and you know, producing high quantity at a lower cost. And we've seen a lot of things that are being borrowed from Latin America, like the formwork that actually allows you to slide through like huge volumes of housing, etc., or prefabs. Things of that nature you're seeing now, but I think we're a long ways from 3D printing any buildings.
My rattling the cage isn't helping right now, is it?
You know, Gugu, if I can add, the problem is risk, and you know, every single project we take on, and I think everyone in this room will agree, every project needs to be feasible. You know, there's very little developers that will look into the future. You know, if we turn out 5 of these shops, and you know, maybe in future it will work. But you know, most of these technologies, it's got a big capital cost, you know, to start, because it isn't in Africa. So the containerized units, we've priced a few. You know, so you know, the mindset of containerized units, you can put a hotel up in 10 months, say, versus 18 months. I don't know. But your risk of getting the containers into the country on time, and the local skills to actually erect those containers, then you know, then you're back at stage 1. Whereas you know, bricks and mortar, you know, you've got very good local skills with bricks and mortar. You know, even better than South Africa. You know, you can also, I see a lot of familiar faces. You know, where we spoke this morning. There's contractors in Kenya, Mozambique, Ghana, all over that. You know, and I'm going to go to Seychelles and Mauritius, Luxembourg, Bay, which Mike mentioned. You know, their concrete work is superb. So the clients, it's, you know, it's like beef. You know, you don't want to put the capital cost at the start to make it work. You'd rather just go with the tried and tested method. You get your returns and carry on. But somewhere we will have to change, and someone needs to take the risk. We need clients with balls.
Literally. Anyone else with feedback on this particular theme? If let's just go ahead, Mark, and the other Mark.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a number of hotel developers and retail developers looking at the African market, and we've done some sort of feasibility and cost studies for them about how do you modularize hotels and how do you build with local materials, or what is actually available in that local market. And particularly from a design perspective, how do you influence that design about what's available and what can you build, rather than trying to import everything. There is always stuff that isn't made locally, unfortunately, but what we found is, if you look at what materials are readily available and how you can use those and use them in a different design perspective, is to bring down the cost and reduce costs from imports. One of the things, all the QSs will agree, we've seen real innovation in how we measure these now, with DIMEX and things like that. It's about how we actually do our jobs. It's very much more electronic now. How long ago when I started as a QS, it was, tapes and rulers and things like that. So it's become more, we're using technology now. And again, even QS is interacting with the Revit model, the design model, and using BIM, how that actually, we can help influence the cost of things. One of the things we've done is we've built an innovation centre in our office in Durban, where we've actually taken Revit and BIM to the next level. We've got a room where you actually put on a set of goggles, and you can physically, as if you are there in the building, and you can actually see all of the details. And, particularly from a design perspective, you can actually talk through that direction, that connection. Where does that pipe goes in? Shouldn't be going through that piece of ductwork. Things, like that from a design perspective are really making a difference to the market. And I think for me, is all about innovation. We have one of the strongest, fastest growing kind of IT sectors in the world, and I can see Africa really trying to embrace that a bit more. What you were saying about the Economist earlier, I said that last week, and I kind of agreed with it. We have been so far behind the times for so long. I think there's a real potential for Africa to leapfrog the rest of the world there, as in other markets, particularly in construction.
Positive feedback there.
I think certainly in areas, in each African country, if you look at the society in general, the top end has a lot of money, and a lot of money to invest in property, in buildings and hotels and things like that. So ultimately you would have, they're looking at sustainable buildings and new ways of doing things at the top end. You've got all your big international head offices that are opening up in the places like Kenya. Even Kampala is getting some of the big, telephone or phone, Vodafone, the cellular phone head offices and things like that. So when they come in, they want to bring in world-class standards and make sure that they're at a standard. I think that the big challenge you've got is that that's only a very small, thin layer of people that can afford and can invest in that type of facilities. Down the bottom end, you've obviously got a lot of people that are just looking for a formal house or formal structure as such. And you've seen a lot, if you look in Luanda, the Chinese built a 20,000 housing unit outside, about an hour outside of Luanda. But the problem you've got with that is that you can't repair it. They imported most of the equipment, most of the panels. A lot of it was made elsewhere and brought into country. And then ultimately the repairs, and when you want to make alterations and things like that, it becomes a lot more expensive. So the poor person who's at the bottom end of the food chain, who hasn't really got that disposable income, you actually end up hurting them a lot more in the long run. So I think, as Mark was saying, Africa is ripe to bring in good economical design and new strategies and technologies. But we've got to be very careful as to where you're putting them, and are they sustainable, and are they going to be for the benefit in the long run?
Fantastic. You had a question?
I think there's room for innovation in construction in Africa. If you're looking at what's happening with telecommunications, like you go to Kenya and Peso, what have done, develop their own products that are suitable for the African conditions. I think what we fail with innovation and technology is when we directly import from overseas technology into Africa and we try to implement it under the African conditions. What we do to adapt and develop standards and products that are suitable for our conditions and for our logistic challenges. And I think there's a lot of room there for innovation, and there could be a lot more products, beyond importing directly technology from developed countries.
Thank you so much, sir. Anyone else with feedback on the theme regarding technology? A hand at the back. Okay. You're making me work today, eh? But that's okay.
Thank you. I risk repeating some things that probably may have been said because I joined the session a bit late. But there's a small area that I've noticed that tends to inhibit new technology and also pushes up construction cost, and it's to do with building bylaws and legislation. That side, that aspect, it tends to be ignored. But what I've noticed is where it exists, those are archaic in most instances, and it's difficult to introduce new technology. Even simple things like pre-stressed or post-stressed concrete becomes an issue because of those existing bylaws. And what I've also noticed is the consultants or consulting institutions have not helped. You look at your engineers, your architects, because in the process of reforming those bylaws, you're consulting the same engineers, the consultants, but for some reason, maybe because their fees are based on the cost of construction, there isn't that much willingness to have those reformed because there's this tendency, perhaps I would think, to keep the costs high because this is where they're getting their fees. So there's that aspect.
Do you want me to respond?
I will respond to that.
Okay.
Apologies, but I do not agree with that. The problem is there's so many potential jobs and, job scarce. Just as the contractors, us consultants, we need work. And, it doesn't help to overprice the jobs and no one gets a piece of the cake. A small piece of big cake, it's much better than, taking big things. So I don't agree with that. And, there's everyone in this room would agree with me. We need to make we need to make it work. I don't know. Mike, help me.
You're going to hate me. I think there's two-pronged here. I think there's an element of truth in what you've just mentioned just now. And I would say that is traditionally on structure. We have been and witnessed firsthand where we have changed structural solutions in what is traditionally was conventional and walked away with about a 10 to 12, 13% net saving on a structure. So in that instance, the engineers who fixed on the structural engineers who fixed their fees, I'm talking to specific projects, it's sensitive because, so what we've tried to advocate in a lot of the projects moving forward now is rather price it on a resource cost plus a profit. And then there is then when you talk about value engineering thereafter, there's far more proactivity, and this is our experience I've had, I'm traditionally talking about East Africa, that there's then the team is more encouraged to value engineer, etc., etc. On the innovation side, I would say one thing which a lot of things are missing is, and some of the stuff we're looking at, is solar. The advancement on solar is really good, and in a way, I'm finding a lot of the African countries even leapfrogging South Africa. We're working with some German and some Spanish companies now where we are actually eliminating the facade and using the solar panels as the facade, as an integrated facade. So I think, and that talks to Leonard's opening discussion earlier, is where the sensitivity on the cost of lease is how these buildings, not year one, but what do they look like in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, with that technology coming in, and how can that reduce that operating cost, which can make it more enticing for a more competitive lease further down the line.
Sounds good. There's a hand on the other side. Mark, if you could please pass on that mic. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Owero, I'm an architect from Nairobi, Kenya. It's exciting to be here and exciting to hear many things and conversations about innovation, technology, efficiency, so on and so forth. And I recognize that quite a few of you have worked in Nairobi, but the projects that we're discussing, I think, are uptown Nairobi, as it were. If you've been in Nairobi and done housing, done retail, you've probably done it west of Nairobi, northeast of Nairobi. East of Nairobi is generally the middle to lower class dweller. And of course, that's the larger population of Kenya, Nairobi, of pretty much every African city. How are we applying innovation, technology, efficiency to house those people? Whether you want to call it social housing, whatever it is, how are we meeting them at their price point? We're not solving that problem, definitely not in Kenya, okay? The housing that we're doing, the retail that we're doing, the commercial that we're doing, I'm part of that problem. I'm an architect. I'd like to make some money as well, okay? But we're not solving a social problem. We are remaining at a certain level of technology. You know, Sarit Center is very nice, and I live and work in Westlands, but you know the end of town that I'm talking about. We're not developing, we're not providing solutions out there. Even in terms of construction costs, east of Nairobi, you can't beat those guys in their buildings, their prices, whether it's technology, whether it's efficiency. I don't know what it is. I'm perhaps posing a question. If you look around Two Rivers sits on its own. Construction around there is done, different parameters. It's a different world, you know, 2 kilometer radius from Two Rivers. I'm asking a question, perhaps analysts will answer.
I think we'll
I hope it makes sense.
Basically, what are we doing to encourage innovation within the procurement space, and housing specifically is what you alluded to. Social housing. Makes sense. I think if we could incorporate that with the closing remarks that we'll get from our panelists, I do understand that we are under pressure for time and need to start wrapping up. So as we go around to get our closing remarks from the panelists, if we could incorporate that into the response, but also with key takeaways as to how to ensure that in the next 5 years, individuals in the room can also prepare themselves to procure and develop properties at a cheaper rate, or at least manage to see some cost containment in the short to medium term. Christian, let's start with you.
Okay, I'll start. Let me just redeem myself from the previous one. I was on my horse already.
Got eyes there, I saw.
No. It's now to speak to Mike again. So, you know, as we all QS in this panel, first of all, let me say QS do not try to inflate the cost. But Mike, to add to you with structural, I think services even more. You know, the remark that Little made about over budgeting. You said you saved 30% in structure. Okay, so I can take, you know, through our West, Central, East Africa on services, we average save about 30% on the tenders on your service, which is mechanical, electrical, fire, lifts, etc. And then there need to be another fee structure in place, and resources one of them. Another one is perhaps, you know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but renegotiate the fees once the tenders come in. You know, if it's a lump sum tender, you know the price, because that is, apologies, that's very true. And you know, 30% on the total project cost. I don't know how many jobs we've lost in the past because of that. You know, and sadly, a QS can only, you know, go so far, but you can't take liability for structural engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. So there is a question, and then there's a whole other discussion about fees in Africa that can be discussed, but that's a topic for another day. Then, you know, to do, you know, what you said was, how do you compete with certain developers with certain prices, low-cost housing, for instance, or housing? I think the problem is when you compete with local developers, they've got a certain target market, local, you know, the local, the uptake. And in Africa, which is a big problem, for instance, I'm not saying you shouldn't do this, but, you know, there's never parking. So if you want to, you know, you get a tenant, whoever, retail, commercial, whatever, and I'll go to housing now, you know, they allow, let's say, 2 or 1 base per 100 square meters of GLA parking. And obviously that's not necessarily halves your cost, but it, you know, it takes the cost down a lot. And your international developers, or let's say developers that wants to change Africa and, you know, give them certain services, whether it's, you know, solar, you know, or parking, whatever, it adds cost. And to tell a tenant, you know, we want $35 per square meter versus, you know, the local cost 20 or 35 versus 25, it's very difficult, and we need to get around that. I know whether it needs to be like in South Africa, you know, we need to have standards, you know, a certain amount of parking base, a certain amount of lux of electricity, your facade installation. I don't know. There's a lot of things, and then residential, the same thing. You know, you can build. We're talking about local materials and imports. In all the countries we're building, there are local materials available. Apart from the aggregates, you can find local tiles, you can find local doors, carpentry joinery, plumbing fittings, which they build, you know, which decrease the cost. But the international developers, or you know, if you want to build a standard A-grade building, you don't use that, and that drives up the cost. So, first of all, you need to see what your market wants, but then again, also you want to set a trend and get to a standard, which you discussed, and that's a big gap at the moment.
Yeah. Mark, let's get your closing remarks as we make our way around the panel very briefly.
We're seeing Africa is growing phenomenally. You know, I think if we're back here in 5 years, it will be twice the size of the market it is today. There will always be peaks and troughs with countries for macroeconomic sort of issues, but I do think that we are seeing more stability in the market coming forward. We are seeing innovation in the market coming forward, which is making the market more stable across Africa, and I think we will start seeing the benefit of that in the near future.
Fantastic. Taz, your closing remarks on the dynamics we see, and of course the long-term objective of making sure that we do see some kind of cost containment when it comes to procurement.
Yeah, and again, I'm just going to disclaim that I'm looking at a Francophone West Africa perspective. I think for the short term, you have to keep expecting differences across countries, because there's different elements that go into construction costs, like direct inputs, equipment, logistics, workforce, fiscal, which we haven't spoken about much, which plays a huge impact, financing and overhead. So there's still going to be differences across countries depending on their specifics. There might be convergence as more and more players get mature in those markets. So hopefully you get to compress costs in the mid to long run. From an innovation point of view, I think one great point that you made, Mark, was the fact that you might not be able to innovate right now on the delivery side, on the design side. To whatever extent we can keep innovating and decreasing costs that way, it will be beneficial for the industry. Just one quick statistics. When you do your costs at the beginning of the project, you have a very huge portion that is in construction and a very small portion that is in design. The long-term cost of the building, 80% of it is operating. So your design has a lot more impact on your long-term cost. So to whatever extent we can innovate there and have solutions for our local needs, we need to push there. It's just not going to be the contractors. There's going to be a lot more design build type of effort where we partner up with the architects, architectural firms at the forefront.
Mark, we wrap up with you.
Just quickly from my side, I think I certainly don't have the solution to the problem, but I think it's a combination of a number of things, and one of them is obviously local governments. To try and bring in low-cost housing or lower-cost housing without the basic infrastructure, water, electricity, sanitation and others, adds a lot of cost to the buildings. Here in South Africa, we've probably got a little bit more formalized. In a lot of the countries, Kenya is not bad, but in a lot of the other countries, there's basically zero, and you're coming off a very low base. So you've got to continue, whoever comes in to develop has to add that to the cost, and then still try and keep the cost of the building down. Coming to Africa and the costs across Africa, I think it's always going to be driven by what's happening in those countries, whether it's political, but probably more importantly the resources. So where you've got big oil and gas drives at the moment, I think the costs are going to go up because there's only so many people to go around to do the work, and in the short term, maybe in the longer term, it'll fluctuate and it'll even out. And certainly my message would be to everyone is that I think there are a lot more skills out there than we probably give people credit for. I think you've got to look for it. Obviously it's not for every building and it's not for every application, but I do think that there are ways around your procurement and getting into country that you can reduce the cost of your construction. But I think a lot of it comes down to planning and knowing your geography. If you aren't prepared to put the time and the effort into the country, you won't ever realize the benefits that will probably exist there already.
Perfect. Mark, Taslim, Mark, And Christian, thank you so much for your time today and joining us for this panel discussion, as well as everyone else in the room for participating and sharing your feedback. It's greatly appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be another breakaway session within each of the 3 separate rooms. Please do feel free to have a quick look at your program to slot into conversations that you'd like to hold on to. It is 20 minutes past 5, so you might be slightly late for the next session. My apologies, but the more you stay, the longer you stay, the more traffic you'll beat here in Joburg. Thank you.